Hey guys, you're watching Dansky, and in this tutorial I'm going to share with you the process for how I used a few simple shapes to create a 3D model of a Dalek and then transform that 3D model into a poster design in Photoshop. So hopefully that sounds like fun. Let's hop into Dimension and get started. Rightio, so we're now in Dimension. First of all, I'm going to go over to the 3D models, drag a cone into the scene, and then from the property inspector on the right, adjust the height and the number of sides to create the body for the Dalek. Next, let's go down to Bevel. We'll turn this on just to add a slight bit of smoothness to these corners, just because objects in the real world aren't perfectly sharp. So this just makes it look a bit more realistic. So something like 0.2 centimeters should do the job. Now after a few more minor adjustments, I'm going to press Command or Control D. This is going to duplicate the cone. There we go. And now I can move one of these up and then use the bottom one for the rubber base. Again, I'm going to make a few adjustments specifically to the height and the top and bottom radius. This is going to be for the rubber base. And then I'm actually going to repeat this process, duplicate this, move it up, and then adjust the properties for the middle part of the body. And using this single shape, this cone, I'm able to customize those properties and use it for different parts of the Dalek. So we're just going to repeat that step again, duplicate, move it up, change the properties. Now here's a nifty little trick to create a rather unique shape. Press 1 on the keyboard, that's the shortcut for the orbit tool, and then rotate along the x-axis holding shift, and then move these so they butt up against each other. Next, drag a torus onto this surface and adjust the properties to create a thin metal ring. This is going to form the structure for the Dalek's neck, and then we're duplicating and moving up, repeating that same process. Once this is done, select all of these shapes and click the Align icon. This will enable you to distribute the shapes an equal width apart, and then I'm going to duplicate one of the previous shapes and drag this to the top. Next, I'm going to scroll the list of 3D models until I find this one that looks like a bowl. I'm going to drag this in and then rotate this 180 degrees. Move this up, and we're going to use this for the dome. Now I'll do this quite often throughout, just select multiple objects and make sure they're aligned centrally. I'm actually going to move this up and hide the dome for a moment, and then drag a cube into the neck area. Again, I'm going to adjust the properties, make this nice and thin. And then once that's done, I'm going to duplicate this shape and add lots of little notches from the bottom to the top. So essentially what I'm building here is like a vertical bracket that's going to attach to the edge of the neck. And I'm just going to take a moment to adjust the position of each of these shapes and then select all of them, group them together and give the group a name. Neck Metal Pillar. Sure, why not? And now I'm going to duplicate this group, move it to the other side, rotate it 180 degrees, and then if I select both, I could duplicate them, rotate them, and repeat until I have enough vertical structures. And at this point, I realized I made them too tall, so I actually had to go and adjust the height manually. So yeah, if you're doing something that involves this style of repetition, make sure you get it right before you start duplicating. So before we carry on with the neck, which does get very complicated, this video is sponsored by Envato Elements, a platform that provides millions of creative assets with unlimited downloads and a commercial license. I used their assets to create the Dalek at the beginning, and to be honest, these days their assets end up in most of my creative work. These include things like photos, illustrations, stock video, motion graphics, fonts, icons, brushes, actions, music, sound effects, 3D assets, and so much more. And all of that for just $16.50 a month with an annual subscription. Check out the link below. Okay, so back to the neck. Now I'm duplicating one of those existing rings, changing the properties to make it thinner, and moving this down to the bottom. Next, I'm going to duplicate this many times and then keep moving this up. This is going to create a grill style effect for the neck. There we go, that looks pretty good. And I tried to give all of my layers a very logical name because this project does get very complicated, so thin neck ring vertical sounds good. Again, I'm going to adjust, duplicate and repeat one of these vertical shapes, and I'm going to use this to add more density to the neck. Now take care when rotating this round if you want to try and get all of these equally spaced apart, and you can see me here doing this by eye. This step may take a little bit of tinkering, especially if you're a perfectionist. Okay, let's bring back some of those other objects and then move the dome down so it sits on top again. Now for this next step, I'm going to add another new cylinder, drag this up, and I'm going to adjust the properties and repeat all of the previous steps, and then use this to create the two lights that will sit atop the Dalek's head. So there we go, we've created one of them. I'm going to group all of these shapes into a folder and call this Headlight 1. Then I'm going to duplicate it and adjust the angle. Once I've got one of them right, I can duplicate this and then do this for the other side. Now I've got to spend a bit of time moving them into position so they sit on either side of the Dalek's head. And getting the rotation and the angle right here is pretty important. Next I'm going to grab that bowl shape again, hollow sphere, rotate this round, and move it up. You can click this icon here to snap to the ground plane, that's a nice nifty shortcut. And I'm actually going to move this up even more, scale it down, and then add another cylinder. I can then position the bowl shape on top of the cylinder, position and angle these on the Dalek, and then duplicate them up. Space them apart equally, remember we did that before, and then adjust the angle so they rest on the body of the Dalek. Now I'm going to duplicate and rotate this 180 degrees, and once that's positioned, I'm going to group these together, and you guessed it, duplicate them and rotate them, and keep rotating all the way around the body, making sure that everything's nicely aligned. Now this next step is literally repeating that same process. I'm going to use the cube shape to build out some detailing for the body, and once I've got one of these done, I can group it all together, duplicate it to the other side, and then repeat that around this entire midsection. So rather than me talk through that entire process again, I'm just going to turn up the music and I'll see you in a moment. There we go, that's looking pretty good. For the next step, I'm going to add in a pyramid, scale this down, and then move this up so it sits in the dome. And again, I'm going to use a few more basic shapes just to add a bit more detailing for the dome, and then to create the eyepiece as well. And at this point, if you've never seen Doctor Who before or you've never heard of a Dalek, you will probably have no idea what is going on right now. Think of it as like a robot space alien. Anyway, adding more discs and duplicating these out, remember to space those apart nice and equally. And again, I'm going to add another cone in. I'm going to go a little bit more radical with the customization here. So I'm going to completely round off one end, and I'm going to use this for the eyepiece. And again, I'm just going to add some more detail. So I'm going to use a torus here, shrink this down, pop it on the end, and then adjust the settings until I get something I'm happy with. And we'll add a few more of these for detail, so just duplicating that shape and moving it around. So for the next step, I'm going to create the arm with the sucker on the end, and then the laser on the other side. Again, the process is very similar to what we've already covered, so I'm going to turn the music up, and I'll see you in a moment. So I think it's all starting to come together rather nicely. Now here I'm just duplicating one of those neck plates, making this a lot taller and shrinking the size down, so this is going to act as like an inner neck. So that's the modeling done. My advice at this stage is to save and duplicate your file. So we have one file that's just the model, and in this next file, we're going to start adding the materials. Okay, so this is where we start to see all of that hard work pay off. First I've selected the dome, and then from the materials tab, I'm going to drag metal onto it. And next I'm going to use the material sampler tool so I can select other objects and then sample them with the same color. The reason I'm doing this is because when you use this technique, all of the objects that I sample that have the same material, if you change one, it will update all of them. Now you can break this link at any time, but what it means is if I make my entire Dalek silver and all of the metal materials are linked, I can change the Dalek to red, blue, gold, whatever color I like, literally in a few seconds, rather than having to go and re-add the color to every piece individually. And you can see here I did actually go with gold in the end, and I've added some black to the metal for the neck. I'm also adding a nice mesh to that inner part of the neck, so that's going to look really cool. And we can adjust the scaling here by changing the repeat option, so we'll get that mesh nice and small, and then change the color. Now this part of the process did take a while, but it was important to set up everything correctly and link all of those materials, so I can then really get creative with the Dalek and adjust the color at the end very quickly and easily. So here I'm converting the eyepiece to a regular shape so I can add a graphic. I've got a camera lens here, so we'll open that up. You can see it pops it on the end. I can move the position so it sits centrally. And then if I click on the color pickup or the thumbnail, I can then open this up in Photoshop. So first up, I'm going to right click this background layer and make this a smart object. Let's give it a name. And then I'm going to go to filter, down to blur, and select Gaussian blur, and just blur this ever so slightly. Next I can add a solid color adjustment layer, and then I'm going to pick a blue as the color, and then change the blending mode. There's lots of these that you can play around with, and in this example I'm going to go with overlay. Let's go back down here again and add a curves adjustment layer. Now I'm going to use this to introduce a little bit more contrast, and once you've got all of your adjustment layers, select them all, right click and create clipping mask. So now they only apply to the lens. Let's go to file and save, and these changes will be updated in Dimension. And it's worth noting that all of those layers will be saved as part of this Dimension project, so you can edit them at any point. So it's starting to look pretty cool with all these materials added. Let's make a few more changes here. And then I'm going to select the environment, and then from the color picker, I'm going to select a black background. So there we go. Next, I'm going to select the environment light. And then from the lights tab on the left, I've got lots of presets that I can click through and get a preview of how the lighting is going to look. And when you're doing lighting, it's definitely worth having that render preview on as well, just so you can see how it will actually look in the final render. Now you can actually hide the environment light and add a 3-point light setup. This will add your key light, your fill light, and your backlight. All of these can be turned on or off and fully customized, and to be honest, I did spend a long time playing around with the lighting. And at this point I'm going to select the canvas itself and then change the dimensions so I'm working within a portrait orientation. And I'll need to reposition the Dalek and adjust the camera, so I'm going to move the Dalek up bring that camera down and try and make that Dalek look as awesome and as menacing as possible. A nice low down camera pointing up makes this thing look pretty powerful. And if you do find the grid annoying, just select the canvas again and uncheck grid as well. Now I've got my camera set up, so let's go to the bookmarks and then I can update this camera angle. This is one that I created earlier off camera. And this is where I started turning some of the lights on and off. I love this one because it's so dramatic. And now I'm done, I'm going to go to render, give this a name, we'll call this Dalek. Make sure the quality is set to high, PSD format, pick a location and click render. And remember, the higher your resolution, the longer your render is going to take. Now this will generate a PSD file, but at this stage it's definitely worth saving your document, because on both Mac and PC I did experience some crashing at this stage. Probably the insane amounts of geometry and the lighting just condensed into a single render just couldn't handle it. So my advice is, if you do hit this brick wall, is to inch forward, make a few changes, save your document, inch forward a bit more and save your document. It's a bit slower, but at least you get the job done in the end. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate my Dalek folder. And you can actually go to view and turn off enable snap to ground if you don't want to snap to the ground in your scene. And I'm just going to move this Dalek out to the side and back so it's behind the other one. And then I'm going to duplicate this again and do this for the other side. Now, as I say, I did experience a lot of crashes in this part of the process. However, I've edited this footage out just so we're not wasting any time. So you can see I've hidden the main Dalek, and now I'm just going to render out these two on their own. We'll call them extra Daleks and then hit render. Again, sometimes it's easier to render these separately, just so you can avoid any crashes if you do have an insane amount of geometry in your scene. But once you've got your renders done, it's time to hop into Photoshop. Okay, so I'm now in Photoshop and you can see I've done a few different renders here, and I've also got a credits PNG template to put at the bottom of the poster. Now you can see I've just taken a moment to duplicate all of these into a single PSD, and I'm going to name my layers and I've organized them accordingly, with two versions of the main Dalek, one with the dramatic lighting and one that's fully lit. Now for the credits, I can change the blend mode to screen and it will remove that dark background, and then I can position this at the bottom. Nice and easy. And I'm just going to hide this for the moment, and then with the fully illuminated Dalek selected, I'm going to add a layer mask, and then press Command or Control I to invert the mask. There we go. Now that's done, I'm going to select the brush tool, and from the drop down at the top, I've selected one of Photoshop's soft round pressure opacity brushes, and I'm going to bring the size down. Next, from the color picker, I'm going to make sure that white is selected as the foreground color all the way in the top left, and then I'm going to start to brush in some of the lighting. Now you can see if I go crazy, it brings back too much of the Dalek, so I'm just going to go around the edge and just use this to bring back in a little bit more detail. Don't get me wrong, I do love that silhouetted look, but I'd like to bring back in some detail, seeing as I spent so long making the damn thing. Okay, so a little bit more work on the mask. And then I'm going to go and show the extra Daleks again, make sure this layer is selected and convert this to a smart object. Then I can go to Filter, Blur, select Gaussian Blur, and then blur these ever so slightly, just to put more focus on the main Dalek. Okay, next I'm going to select all of the Dalek related layers, right click and convert everything into a smart object, and I'll call this Dalek Final. Next, let's go to Filter and down to Camera Raw Filter. This feature is the secret sauce in my opinion. You can change so many different things here to do with color, lighting, shadows, blacks, whites, everything you want. And I'm just going to spend a minute tinkering with these settings. And one thing I love about this is that you can introduce some grain as well. So it just brings back in a little bit more noise. Because that's one thing with 3D renders is they can render them out unrealistically clean. So introducing a little bit of noise, that bit of grain, just makes them feel more realistic, a little bit more akin to a photograph. Okay, once you're happy, click OK. And you can see these are now listed under this layer. They can be edited or deleted at any time, which is great. And next I'm going to select the type tool, click anywhere, and type the word Dalek. I'm going to select white as my color from the color picker at the top, and then I can tinker with font properties, alignment, all that stuff until I get something that I'm happy with. Pretty happy with that, so yeah, check. One last thing I'm going to do is select the Dalek Final layer and then use the quick selection tool to select the lights. And then once they're all selected, go to Edit, Copy Merged, Edit and Paste. Name this layer Lights Glow. And then I'm going to right click this and select blending options. And I can bring the fill all the way down because we don't need to see the lights. And then I can check outer glow. Pick the color as white or red, yellow, green, whatever color takes your fancy. And then I can adjust the properties of the glow. And once you're happy, click OK, and there we go, we've added a glow effect to the lights on the Daleks. And that is pretty much the icing on the cake, and this is the final design. And there we go, that wraps up the video. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I had a ton of fun making this, 3D and Photoshop. Mwah! Absolutely loved it. Thank you so much to Envato Elements for sponsoring this video, and to you for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.